In 1977, Joan Crawford passed away. Hollywood lamented a legend's passing. Her career had started from nothing, changing herself to become one of the strongest female characters in movie history. However, beyond the glitz, behind the meticulously polished picture, there was more to it, awaiting the story. In the weeks that follow, when her estate was opened after her death and her family and her will were read, fans were subjected to upsetting findings. What they discovered left not just her kids, but the whole industry shook in unsettling ways. From poverty to power for decades, the life of Joan Crawford had never been straightforward, and maybe that's why her death would arouse such interest and dispute. Lucille Fia Lost was born on March 23, 1904, but some documents state 1905 or in 1906. She went to San Antonio, Texas. And a world of misery. Her dad left the family shortly after she birthed, making it difficult for her mother to raise Joan by herself, along with her older brother. When she turned 11, her hands became rough from working as a lavish, using water and soap, her body carrying loads that no child should have to carry. When she was 12, after a failed attempt, life was forever altered. Tried to hop on a moving vehicle. She cut her foot on a piece of glass, the cut so serious that physicians thought cutting off her leg. 3. She recovered from the surgeries, but the trauma left her terrified for the rest of her life of infection. That anxiety would develop into an fixation on cleanliness that characterized her public persona and subsequently the more negative facets of her personal life. Dedicated to, she dropped out of school early to avoid poverty. She launched herself into a dance. By the early 1920s, she was acting in New York, followed by Chicago, under the Billy Casson is his stage name. Talent scouts found her to be very presence and unwavering determination. In 1925, MGM offered her a $75 per hour contract week. Additionally, the studio gave her a new Joan Crawford's identity. It was the start of her change into one among the most lucrative celebrities in the Golden Age. She climbed quickly and unrelentingly. She personified our dancing daughters. The jazz era's flapper culture, dancing until she reaches her feet in various scenes. Bleeding, refusing to halt until each take was flawless. Early in the 1930s, she was well known, comparable to Greta Garbo, Norma Shearer as well. She performed on screen as women who struggled to escape poverty to riches, tales that reflected her own ascent from actress to Hollywood's elite. However, even though she flourished in public, Crawford had a more private life. Brittle, characterized by fears and fractured marriages, as well as the rigorous oversight she positioned over her family and house. Family shadows, rivalries, and stardom. Joan Crawford, by the middle of the 1930s, was securely positioned as one of MGM's most brilliant stars. Her parts in movies such as Sutty McCoy and The Grand Hotel resonated with viewers, particularly during the Great Depression. She frequently played working-class women who persevered and tenacity, a representation of her personal narrative, as well as one that made her an motivation for innumerable women who are actual adversity. However, behind the scenes of achievement, tensions developed. Crawford's Norma Shearer's rivalry was notorious. Shearer, who was wed to Irving, an MGM executive Thalberg, frequently obtained the most prestigious positions. Crawford resentfully, "How am I going to compete with Norma when she's having an affair with the boss?" However, in spite of this drawback, Joan films often performed better than Shearer's at the box office. One more conflict with Greta Garbo was unique. As Garbo symbolized enigmatic elegance and distance, Crawford was straightforward, approachable, and never-ending. People in the audience who felt invisible saw themselves in during the Great Depression Joan Crawford. Her private life was quite less steady. Her initial union within 1929, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. after 4 years, beset by adultery and disapproval from his relatives. A second 1935 marriage to the actor Franco Tone brought violence along with passion and heartache, with allegations of mistreatment and fights in public. Her third marriage to Philip Terry, an actor, in 1942, and they adopted a son together, but she subsequently adopted the name Christopher. Following their separation. Not able to conceive biological children, Crawford looked to adoption. She adopted in 1940 her first daughter, Christina, via a cause California law prohibited preventing unmarried women from adopting. Above in the years that followed, she adopted 3 more children, twin girls, Christopher, Cindy and Kathy. In the public eye, the picture was flawless, a glitzy Hollywood celebrity with a lovely family. In private, though, there were fissures appearing. As the 1930s came to an end, her career took a dip. In 1938, she was referred to as box office poison, which embarrassed even the most well-known celebrities. However, Joan would not give up. Her perseverance would result in a startling. The 1940s saw a reinvention that revitalized her career while also expanding the difference between the strong star, the troubled woman, and the world's favorite behind closed doors. Her children were aware. Rebirth, success, and deterioration. In 1943, following almost 20 years at Joan Crawford's career at MGM came to a breaking point. Previously regarded as one of the most valuable stars in the studio, she was passed over and now only offered weak roles for the parts she so badly desired. When Greer was the lead in Madame Curry, Joan made the decision to leave Garson. At 37 years old, in a move that many believe was suicide for her career, and she paid $100,000 to cancel her contract with MGM. However, Crawford's survival instinct was keen. Only she signed a lucrative deal a few days later. Working for Warner Brothers and making $500,000 for 3 movies, a huge amount at the time. More significantly, she was awarded the authority to accept her scripts, a privilege that not many actresses had. For she turned down roles for more than a year and waited. For the ideal undertaking. That risk paid off with Mildred Pierce in 1945. The movie was a melodramatic noir about Amatha who gives up everything for support her unappreciative daughter. Joan battled valiantly for the role, even going through a screen test, embarrassing move for one of her star size. However, she was given the role, and with its redemption, audiences were astounded by the performance, and both reviewers and critics, winning her the Academy Best Actress award. However, she renowned for accepting the Oscar while in bed, declaring herself ill. Her triumph was indisputable. When she was 40, she was once more as the reigning monarch of Hollywood. But the victory didn't make her disappear. Demons. Joan kept pushing herself. Starring in possessed and humorous films, she receives another Oscar from the latter. Nomination. She was an expert in female roles. Stressed, lonely, compulsive, and frequently self-destructive individuals who reflected elements of her personal life. In the 1950s, she suddenly became afraid and earned her 3rd nomination, demonstrating her ability to, even in middle age, still have command of the screen. However, off-screen, her private realm disassembled. Alfred Steele, CEO, was her spouse. Of Coca-Cola in 1955, and following his untimely death in 1959 caused her to throw herself into the business, even taking part in its board. Her drinking worsened in the interim. She started drinking vodka in the morning, and co-stars discussed hidden bottles and whispers. In cans of Pepsi. At home, her kids subsequently remembered that the more she consumed, the more erratic and domineering she became. By the 1960s, she had changed careers. Once more. Regardless of what happened to baby Jane matched her with B, a fierce rival. Davis in a macabre story about 2 rotting sisters. Her career was revitalized by the movie. But the backstage conflict intensified. Infamous and accused of sabotage and brutality, Joan's actions were even more horrifying. Movies, such as Straight Jacket and Tragedy, but by that time, the authority she once had dimmed. Withdrawn, her well-being she declined and quietly retired in the mid-1970s. When she passed away at the age of 73 on May 10, 1977 years old, people anticipated a classy send-off to a Hollywood legend. Rather, what would come next would be one of the most startling estate disputes the will that broke in the history of cinema delusions. The reading of Joan Crawford's will 1977. It didn't convey the picture of the devoted mother, whom she had long shown the general public. Her estate is estimated to be worth approximately $2 million, more than $10 million in the current money, was dispersed in a startling manner. Hollywood. Out of her 4, 2 were adopted. Cindy and Kathy, 2 kids, were given funds in trust of $77, $500 each, as well as inherited personal property, including the Mildred Oscars she received. Pierce. Organizations near Crawford, as the American Cancer Society, for example, and the Association for Muscular Dystrophy, received large gifts as well. However, the chilling clause was the real shock, considering the formality of legal terminology and the pain of a personal assault, the determination proclaiming, "I intend to make no this is a provision for my son Christopher. Or Christina, my daughter, for various reasons which they are familiar with." It was act of rejection that is both permanent and public. The choice astounded not just her kids but the whole sector. The daughter Christina, who would eventually written by Crawford, "Mommy Dearest," public partner for many years, frequently captured together in what seemed to Beto be an affectionate connection. Christopher, 1943 adoption, had also been raised in the legacy of Crawford's notoriety. To observe their names were removed from the will. Greater than a monetary loss. It was a last act of alienation. Christopher and Christina didn't waste much time in arguing against the will. That their mom had been mentally unfit at the time of her signature, stating her years of binge drinking, mood swings, and potential pressure from Kathy and her husband. The case took a long time. Courts, bringing up very private issues into the spotlight. Family conflicts that Crawford had concealed throughout her life poured into the news in July. After almost 2 years, in 1979, the case concluded with a settlement. Christopher and Christina were given a small portion of the estate, $55,000 each. The payment provided some recognition, but no recovery. The resentment persisted, enhanced by Christina's autobiography, which depicted Joan as a violent and governing authority. For many, the will had previously verified what the book claimed. The meticulously manicured picture of the ideal mother, Crawford had been aphasied. However, the disputes did not conclude with the money distribution. Those in charge of her belongings started to organize her house and possessions. They found unsettling and perplexing things that made it more difficult to figure out who the true Joan Crawford. Hidden facts, locked doors. Availability of Joan Crawford's estate was already startling, but the physical findings within her residences added a more sinister, dark layer to her narrative. When family members, employees, and the executives started going through her possessions, they discovered items that contradicted Crawford's polished appearance. Had forecasted for several decades. The most unsettling discovery was a collection of doll heads, some of which were meticulously boxed away, others placed on shelves. Lacking bodies. From the outside, it appeared hideous, almost malevolent. For those who recalled Christina's assertions in Mommy Dearest regarding her mom's fixation on perfection and control, the doll heads turned into an eerie metaphor. It appeared that they represented the Crawfords' attempt to mold the populace in her life, particularly with her kids, into perfect, quiet incarnations of her. There were the locks, too, and their own design. Crawford's closets and apartments were full of heavy-duty, unusual locks that went well beyond what most houses necessary. Numerous closets, including guest rooms, were bolted shut, and latches. It implied a woman to some desperate to conceal her belongings or secrets. It reverberated to others. According to Christina, Crawford would confine her kids as a form of discipline, keeping them hidden until they complied. Evidence in the old bedroom of Christopher strengthened this story. Scratches left the door's interior scarred. As though someone had attempted to leave. Some people thought these marks came from Christopher himself, enclosed as a boy. However, detractors contended that scratches might have been brought on by something else. The pictures were terrifying. And it was too closely aligned with ignore Christina's accounts. Then a secret was discovered. Safe, which contained financial documents, private correspondence, as well as pictures. Reports state that they were pictures of Crawford just a short distance away from her regulated public image. Compromise. Occasionally tumultuous, glimpses into a life that conflicted with she insisted on the starch glamour. Additionally, there were letters that alluded to unspoken disputes, scandals, and feuds, giving Christina unsent notes that implied Crawford engaged in combat with resentment and guilt all the way to the end. When taken as a whole, these findings painted an image that does not depict a glamorous legend, but of a lady with a locked private life both figuratively and literally. Additionally, as if the assets and the will weren't disturbing enough, the heritage of soon after, Crawford's estate experienced an even stranger turns. Haunting rumors that haunted legacy refused to die. Following the passing of Joan Crawford, her estate's mysteries were resolved. Restricted to court cases and locked whispers of paranormal activity. Safes quickly encircled her properties. Lived in, particularly her well-known Brentwood El Jodo, was a mansion that feature formerly served as a glittering emblem of excessive Hollywood, where Clark Barbara, Gable, and Marlene Dietrich Stanek socialized at lavish gatherings. However, decades after Crawford's relocation out, its standing changed from glitzy to eerie. Tales started in late 1970s and expanded during the family's residing in the house in the 1980s. Reported cold spots, unsettling events, odd sounds, and moving objects without elaboration. Some described hearing voices in the night that don't belong to anyone, or the clicking sound of a typewriter long after, away in Crawford's former study, her passing. The most horrifying were accounts of the spectral form of a woman floating across the stairway or showing up as a white gown close to Crawford's bedroom once dozed off. Her adopted children are in the nursery. Had survived, became a specific area of fear. Visitors reported hearing a faint sobbing from the space, while others experienced intense sadness after entering. Investigators of the paranormal who found during a visit in the 1980s that the house contained leftover energy from Fester's erratic interactions with her kids. Some even conjectured that Crawford's intense dominance and fixation leaving a psychic imprint with cleanliness. The haunting seemed too intense to go away. To reach outside El Jodo's walls. Auction items came with their own unsettling tales. Mirrors and fragments of it was claimed that furniture gave off disturbing energy. According to one customer, view the reflection of an unknown woman looking back at them. For a lot of people, it was as though Crawford was holding on to her assets, unwilling to part with the control she had over her world and life. These stories might never be validated, but they highlight the persistent uneasiness about the legacy of Joan Crawford. Showed rejection and resentment. Her possessions revealed secrets and obsessions, as well as the just ghost stories increased the feeling that she was unable to peace be with you. Regardless of one's belief in the paranormal, Crawford's property turned into notorious as her profession. An eerie reminder that behind Hollywood's even the brightest lights may conceal shadows that never really go away. Joan Crawford constructed her life on self-control, discipline, and reinvention, but her secrets and death poured out in ways she was no longer able to control. From her will's startling omissions to the unsettling findings in her legacy at home continues to be one of the most tragic and eerie movie in Hollywood stories. How do you feel about Joan Crawford's decisions? Or an indication of a harsh disposition or the wounds from a life of struggle to survive? Let us know what you think below and remember to subscribe for more tales from the untold side of Hollywood.